William. One of the most fascinating ways that rulers could maintain their power and authority was through the harnessing of religion to support their rule. We saw European monarchs, Ottoman sultans, and Mughal emperors all employ aspects of religion to justify their control in our last episode. But what happens when religion kind of builds a life of its own and shatters the unity of the community? We're going to look at two examples of religious communication breakdowns in this period and one example of religious blending. Let's start in Europe. As you know, despite its origins within the context of Middle Eastern monotheisms, Christianity had become firmly rooted as the primary religion in Europe, and the main branch or denomination of Christianity within Europe was the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church had already experienced a split from their Eastern Orthodox brethren in 1054, and 400 and some odd years later, the events of the late medieval period and the Renaissance caused another split in the Catholic Church. This one called the Protestant Reformation. Throughout Europe's period of political decentralization, the Catholic Church, Catholic does mean universal, had provided the glue to hold the culture of Europe together. Its hierarchical structure mimicked the organization of the Roman Empire. It was responsible for education, social programs, as well as being a huge landowner. During the crisis of the plague, it started to lose a lot of its clout, and this was further hindered by the rise of strong monarchs who wanted to subordinate the church to meet their needs rather than serve the church itself. Popes, the CEOs of the church, if you will, started to come from extremely influential families and use the church to enrich their relatives and themselves. The moral compass of church teachings was often lost in the quest for fame, glory, and wealth. When you go to Rome and you see buildings like this, it's important to note that all of that didn't come for free, and money needed to be raised to fund projects like the Sistine Chapel and a new St. Peter's Basilica. In order to finance these projects, the church embarked on two major fundraising campaigns, neither of which really sat well with church teachings. The first was the selling of indulgences, or basically get out of hell for free, or well, for money, cards. The second was the selling of church offices and positions to people who weren't qualified but planned on using them to make money. Furthermore, a series of corrupt, warlike, or just plain immoral popes had left the church spiritually as well as financially bankrupt. It was in this situation that a sensitive German monk named Martin Luther went on a pilgrimage to Rome, the second most important city in Catholicism. When he was there, he was completely overcome by the nastiness of the city, not just in terms of it being filthy, but in terms of the type of people who inhabited his holy hometown. There were gambling dens and brothels everywhere, and he was shocked by the behavior of the high-ranking church officials, living in their palaces with their mistresses prancing around. When he got back home to Wittenberg in Germany, a new main indulgent seller was stationed there, and he just could not take it anymore. He sought out his Bible and found in it all the problems he'd been seeing in the church were not justified in the Bible. In fact, of all the pomp and circumstance of Catholicism, he could only find 2 of the 7 sacraments justified. According to the Bible, all people really needed to go to heaven was to believe. He called this justification or salvation by faith alone, which basically meant people didn't need the church or really anything it offered. He set out on a crusade to purify the church and posted a list of 95 abuses he felt needed to be fixed. These were called the 95 Theses, and according to legend, he nailed them to the door of the church in Wittenberg. As you can imagine, this didn't make him popular with Catholic officials, and he eventually had to break away and set up his own branch of Christianity, Lutheranism. Of all the Protestant denominations, Methodist, Episcopal, Baptist, etc., they wouldn't be possible without this move by Luther. The church, after some time being upset, decided they should probably address some of the issues occurring and created the Council of Trent, in which they met multiple times over the course of almost 20 years to sort out what Catholicism should keep and what it should correct. Indulgences were done away with, priests and other leaders were to be held to higher moral standards, and major Catholic beliefs were confirmed. This, of course, led to various religious wars throughout Europe, most notably the 30 Years' War, which began in the German states and spread throughout most of the continent. When all was said and done, millions of people had died, the farmland was destroyed, and people were reeling from all of the upheaval. The resulting Peace of Westphalia restructured the European states and allowed monarchs to choose which faith their subjects would be. Not exactly religious freedom, but closer than they had been. We've already touched on the rivalries that grew between the Sunni Ottoman Empire and the Shia Safavid Empire, but let's delve a little deeper into that and see what we can find. As Shah Ismail, the founder of the Safavid Empire, was growing his territory through conquest to eventually look like this, he aggressively imposed his of Islam on all of the inhabitants. He was essentially descended from a major Islamic mystic, Sufi Safaviya, so he definitely wanted to promote this version of Islam. Furthermore, it allowed him to claim an equivalent religious status to the Ottoman Sultan, who, as caliph, was supposed to be the religious and political leader of all Muslims. This rivalry between the Ottomans and the Safavids helped to consolidate both empires, as it was easy for them to claim this is who we are and this is who they are, and we are not them. The Battle of Chaldiran in 1514 cemented the borders of both empires and allowed for Ismail to double down on Shia Islam within his own empire, creating a Shia sandwich between the Ottomans and the Mughals. It also allowed the Ottomans to strengthen their control over Iraq and the Holy Land. Because Islamic teachings prohibit wars between Muslims unless there's a religious reason, for the century and a half of tension and battles that followed the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514 to be justified, both empires needed to paint the other as dangerous to Islam itself. So the Ottoman disruption of Safavid trade routes wouldn't be enough. Instead, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I, in a letter to his Safavid counterpart, said, "It has been heard repeatedly that you have subjected the upright community of Muhammad, prayers and salutations upon its founder, to your devious will, that you have undermined the firm foundation of the faith, that you have unfurled the banner of oppression in the cause of aggression, that you no longer uphold the commandments and prohibitions of the divine law. He has laid waste to mosques, it is said, constructing idol temples in their stead, that you have torn the noble fiber of Islam with the hand of tyranny, and that you have called the glorious Quran the myths of the ancients. The rumor of these abominations has caused your name to become like that of Harith deceived by Satan." So, as you can see, the violence between the two empires was justified using religious means, and the violence would break out periodically in a series of wars until 1639, when the Treaty of Zuhab finally settled their borders and allowed them to focus on other things. The Ottomans in particular were increasingly concerned with their European borders, and the Safavids needed to keep control of their wily ethnic groups and deal with the Russians and the Mughals. Religious conflict had originally accompanied the arrival of Islam into India. The predominant Hindu population found little of value in the new monotheistic religion of their conquerors. However, when the Mughal dynasty replaced the Delhi Sultanate, a new, more moderate and accommodating approach resulted. The early Mughal rulers sought to incorporate Hindus into the government, ease restrictions on some of their practices that were antithetical to Islam, and promote good relations. Akbar, in particular, was very accommodating to Hinduism and invited religious scholars of all faiths, including Christianity and Buddhism, to have inclusive discussion, seeking a world religion that he eventually called Din-i-Ilahi, or Godism. He abolished the jizya, or poll tax, that non-Muslims had to pay, and even had his son instructed in the New Testament. Out of the Mughal Empire, another syncretic religion would arise, this one Sikhism, one of the world's major religions. Akbar, in his vein of religious tolerance, allowed this community to flourish and bridge the gaps between the native Hindu religious traditions and the growing Islamic influence. Sikhism was founded by a man named Guru Nanak and proclaimed the unity of all things in one creator. Despite its good fortune during the reign of the tolerant Akbar, Sikhs in South Asia would be less fortunate during the reigns of his successors, finding an especially hard time in the more orthodox and hardcore Aurangzeb, who sought to purify the indulgent aspects of his ancestors' version of Islam. As we've seen, a religion can either support the rule of a leader or can destabilize a region through conflict. I've heard my students throughout the years take different positions on the role of religion in society, and as usual, I think it's important that we keep in mind the deeply personal and how it can interact with society at large. In order to take a strong and committed stand on something, we hardly ever know all the layers of nuance that go along with it. And it's never more important to keep that in mind when dealing with someone's religion. We owe them that courtesy before we draw hard and fast conclusions.